When I was 31, I gave up a good job, a potential promotion, a really good life that I had started to build for myself in Nashville to move to Chicago for a relationship. A relationship that I wasn't quite sure about. Actually, I felt in my gut it wasn't the right thing, but I did it anyway. And then I couldn't really explain to myself or to my friends that were asking me, was I sure? But I can now, and I will in a minute. Before that relationship, I was in another relationship briefly after a long-term relationship, like a really long-term relationship. I'm talking about like 5 years. Before I moved to Chicago, I was in another relationship briefly, and they moved pretty fast, one after the other, with a guy for about 2 years. And while he was great to me, and a lot of the ideals and the standards of how I want to feel in a relationship came from that, but it still was not a really good situation. But I still stuck around for 2 years and would have stuck around longer if he had not ghosted me. And when I say ghosted, I mean, and this was before ghosted was the thing. I mean, like, I woke up one day and no answer calls, no email, none of that. That was the first time I had ever had a bad romantic relational experience. I've always had pretty positive experiences as it relates to dating. I had never really been in a position where I was confused about who I was to someone or whatever the case may be. I just was always the girlfriend. So I moved to Chicago in August of 2016. By May of 2017, I was moving out of the apartment that I was living in with the man that I moved here for and into my own apartment, and I've been single ever since. I told y'all that story because what I learned after that, after the first 3 months of really being like, it was him, he was terrible, he was da-da-da-da, I really sat down and sort of like ran through the situation in my head. And then I started thinking about the previous situation. I had definitely come to terms pretty quickly that in both of those experiences, I had settled. And I always say, you know where things settle, at the bottom. So you can't be surprised when something is a bottom of a barrel ass experience when you're settling for something. And so then that made me want to interrogate why, right? Because now I know my role in what has happened to me relationally. I want to know why. And you know the conclusion that I came to? At that time, I was still very, very resolute that I wanted to be a mom, that I wanted to have children, and I was, past 30 and I wasn't married, and I had come out of a long-term relationship, like 4 or 5 year, 6 years if you count the year where you off and on, right? Relationship that didn't end in marriage, and you know how people get when you're in a relationship for a long time and you ain't married. People like, oh, you was with him too long. You get that pressure. You turn 30. People get to tell me your biological clock ticking. So for me personally, I was getting a little desperate because I had this idea of how things were supposed to go. I was little Angie from the block. I left the hood. I went to college. I got these degrees. I started getting, my first like good corporate jobs. Now I just need to get married and have a baby, and then I would be the ultimate success story. I would be able to say, I did everything right. Anyway, I recognize that it was me and my desperation that landed me in those 2 back-to-back situations that were not really good situations. I think 2 things were my saving grace in that situation. And when I say saving grace, I just mean, me being able to get out of at least the one in Chicago pretty quickly. One, and I know it's crazy to say this is fortunately, so maybe not fortunately, but one of them is because I have a hard boundary as it relates to what I consider violence in a relationship. And for me, it does not have to just be physical. If you are emotionally abusive to me, if you are yelling at me, talking crazy to me, talking down to me, belittling me, or just being mean to me for absolutely no reason, for me, those are forms of abuse. And as a domestic violence survivor, I just have a hard boundary. If you don't know how to talk to me, if I've pissed you off and you don't know how to talk to me with love, then it's going to be a hard no for me. And when I say I'm a domestic violence survivor, I wasn't domestically abused in a relationship. My mom was killed by her boyfriend. And so for me, men yelling at me, people in general, but especially men yelling at me, being mean to me, talking down to me or crazy to me or believing, it's an immediate no. You're immediately done. And so for me, I was like, oh, this isn't gonna work because you don't know how to talk to me. You don't know how to treat me. And I don't like the way I feel in this situation. And then also, I have an ego the size of the world. Like, I have a big ego. An ego can be, bad and good. But it's just, do you know who the hell I am? Like, please, you better treat me like the princess that I am. And y'all know what's crazy? I was still operating out of that thought process, even though I was watching the girls, because at this time, again, I was 30. I was a decade removed from undergrad at this point, right? So I was watching the girls that I went to college with that had got married right outside of college, had their kids, so did it the right way. I was watching them starting to go through divorces and at most become the custodial parent that gets child support and some support from their husband. At worst, become full custodial parent. The husband is going on about her business. She might get some child support. That's a fight, right? But she becomes the very thing that we all, and let me tell you something, I come from the generation of I date for marriage. We're only dating for marriage. I'm dating with intention. I come from that school of women. So I started seeing my peers who did it right still end up in the place that we were all trying to avoid. And I still was like, it's not gonna be me because I can control the whole situation. What I have learned, and this is why I'm telling y'all this story, and yes, it sort of relates to the conversation that has been happening around Ashanti possibly being pregnant by Nelly and a lot of the negative responses to it, mostly coming from young women. And I think as a 39, almost 40-year-old woman, I'll be 40 in March, right? I give grace because I've been there. But also I've had a lot more time because I'm a lot older, right? To really, what I like to call, root my standards in reality. It doesn't mean that I don't have standards. To know me is to know I have been single for the last 8 years. I can tell you 2 guys that I have actually dated because, baby, the standards are there. Trust me. One of the biggest realities that I have rooted myself in as it relates to relationships, and I'm talking about relationships in general, familial relationships, friendships, but especially romantic relationships, is that is not a controllable. Anything that involves other people, you cannot control, right? And my mantra is control the controllables. So once I apply that to relationships, right, I stopped being like, it gotta go, right? Because I can't control other people. And in order to be in a relationship, it has to involve another person. So I can have the standard of, I gotta be married before I have kids. It gotta happen like A, B, C, D, E, and F, and G. And it can happen exactly that way. And I still can't control the outcome. We could still get divorced, right? And at best, I'll get child support and that person will help me, be there and help me physically with the children. I'll have 50-50 custody. So I'll be a single person that has children and not a single mom at best. So you can plan your life how you want to. You can have all of these standards how you want to. But I'm just saying, rooted in a little bit of reality. People wake up one day and they decide they don't love you no more. People die. People become incapacitated. You don't know what life has ahead of you. So to very boldly and matter-of-factly say, I will never be a baby mama, you don't know, because you cannot control people and you can't control life. You don't know what's coming around the corner. And lucky for me, back in the day when me and my girls were making bold statements like that, social media was very much in its baby form, right? And so we didn't have TikTok where we can jump on and make statements like that will live and follow us forever. I'm just saying, as an older, maybe slightly more wiser, someone that has a little more lived experience, have your standards. One thing that I talk to the young ladies that follow me about all the time on here, because most of my audience is a lot younger than me, is having standards and sticking to them. So have your standards. but root them into some reality.